Hi everyone, I'm Tristan Smith and I'm a project engineer with Method Technologies, and today we're going to be taking a look at cybersecurity and asking the question, are you really as secure as you think? We're going to be covering a lot of ground here, but to start we're going to go through some of the basic definitions and some of the threat actors that are out there and what they're trying to take from you when they attempt to gain access to your accounts or hack your computers. Starting off, we're going to take a look at just what is cybersecurity. Basic dictionary definition states that cybersecurity is the technologies, processes, and practices designed to protect networks, computers, and data from attack or unauthorized access. The key here is really that attack or unauthorized access. People consider it kind of more of a third-party attacking, but the unauthorized access part is definitely pertinent to this discussion as well. So who's out there and what are they after? First group we're going to look at is security researchers. These are researchers that investigate technologies and look for holes and flaws in the underlying machine code. You may have heard recently about some exploits on Intel and AMD processors called Spectre and Meltdown. These were flaws that were actually in the code that runs these chips that are inside every computer. Security researchers found these bugs and then published the results. They weren't really an issue before, but now that this bug flaw is out there, companies need to patch it or else a nefarious third party could gain access or exploit this bug for their own nefarious means. In general, security researchers aren't doing it for anything bad. They don't have negative intentions. They have their best intentions, people's best intentions in mind. But once they expose these flaws, it makes it really easy for other parties to gain access. Hacktivists. You may remember a few years back a group called Anonymous. They were in the news a lot, basically causing havoc, trying to raise awareness for different causes they believed in. Their general goal is just to draw attention to them and their causes. They do this by doing a number of different things, such as denial of service attacks. This is where they get a large number of computers to basically hammer a website or service or company until that company is no longer able to function. There's some more analog examples of this. It used to be a thing where people would send faxes of black pages just to companies to make them run out of toner. It's the same kind of concept. You're just basically flooding with requests until legitimate traffic can't get to that site. They also might try to deface. So politically, this is something that's somewhat common. You'll see websites around election times be defaced by hackers or other third parties, just trying to raise awareness of their cause and their beliefs. And then public ridicule or mockery. It kind of goes hand in hand with the other defacement, but they may try to ridicule or mock people if they feel they've been wronged as a group. Next group we're going to look at is insiders. These are people inside the organization or formerly inside the organization who feel they've been wronged or have some kind of want some kind of gain. A lot of times they're motivated by revenge. Maybe they were passed up for a promotion. Maybe they aren't making as much money as they want to. So they might be doing this out of revenge. They also might be doing it out of curiosity. They might want to know what the financial statements are for the company. Again, they might not be doing a full-on hack or attack, but they are still accessing without authorization data that they should not have access to. Another reason they may try to do this is to cover up mistakes. Maybe they made an error and now they're trying to cover it up. Those would all be illegitimate reasons for insiders to exploit these cybersecurity holes. Lastly, theft of assets. This ties more into straight criminal realm, but an insider is always going to have a little bit better access, a little bit higher level of authority than someone coming in from outside the organization, which makes them obviously a more of a threat. Finally, this is the category you would find most people would associate with cybersecurity, and that's criminals. Criminals are after one thing and pretty much one thing alone, theft of assets. These assets don't necessarily have to take on a form that you'd normally expect, and we'll be kind of covering that next. The what? What are they after? Assets. So traditional assets you would think of as, cash and money, but they're anything that really has value. And the value really depends on who's evaluating, and that value is not always obvious. Some examples would be cash, accounts, financial information, technical information, and intellectual property. A lot of these items are pretty obvious. Accounts don't have to be necessarily a financial banking account. This could be to a Gmail account or to your work email account. There's value found in a lot of those things as well. Financial information doesn't have to just be banking information. It could also be company metrics regarding what your finances are, how your money's coming in, where your money's going. Competitors might be after certain aspects of that as well. Technical information, that really ties into policies and procedures that you might have in place to differentiate you from your competitors. That also is something that they may be after as well. And intellectual property is anything that might have a copyright or a patent or be considered a trade secret. Um, Obviously, that's a target as well. And finally, your website. It's your public face to the bulk of the world. If someone looks up your name, the first thing they're probably going to see is your website. So you might not consider it a traditional asset, but it really ties hand in hand with your public image. Other non-traditional ones you might think that might come up are employee information, social security numbers, financial informations like tax information, um, general employee records. If you run background checks, those might come into play as well. That's all data that someone might be after. This helps them kind of build a picture of that employee for identity theft. It also might tie into credit rating information. So if you pull credit reports for individuals, that would be something that someone might be after. Health information, health insurance. There's a lot of information stored in HR records. Maybe not in regards to specific procedures, but premiums and social security numbers and effective dates. All of that can be used to create this better image of an individual and to better steal their identity later on. Other personal information, if the record is long enough, it might have previous mailing addresses, information like that that might be used as a second verification factor for some financial transactions. And then finally, reputation. This could be, this data, if accessed inappropriately, could be used to damage this person's reputation. This could be more closely tied to like an insider type attack where they're trying to get revenge or maybe use this information to really tarnish a fellow employee's reputation. So now we're going to take a look at the numbers and why this matters. It's a growing issue, and these are some of the larger breaches, but there's more and more smaller breaches basically occurring every day. In 2016, 3 billion Yahoo accounts were hacked in one of the biggest breaches of all time. So if you had a Yahoo account or have a Yahoo account, you were probably affected by this. There are notifications sent to reset your password, set up other types of authentication methods. This was a very big deal. Last year, credit bureau Equifax was breached, resulting in 143 million leaked accounts. This gives a pretty good picture of persons from their credit standpoint, and definitely can be used for a number of nefarious reasons. But you don't hear about it in the news anymore, but it is very much still a major problem. Same thing, JP Morgan Chase, 83 million household accounts that included personal information, email addresses, and phone numbers. The more data that a hacker or a threat has on an individual, the more complete that picture is and the more value it has to them. The more efficient they can be at stealing a person's identity. How? So we talked about the basics of who's out there, what they're looking for, and why it really matters to you and how big of a threat it is. But now we're going to talk about some of the ways that this information can be gained and how this information can be gained and what you need to be aware of. Hardware vulnerabilities. This would include items such as found hardware. So if you've ever walked out of a business and seen a thumb drive on the ground, don't pick it up. It might not be pertinent to your organization, but these type of attacks target financial institutions regularly. They're looking for someone to pick up a thumb drive that they found on the floor. and then plug it into a machine that's on an isolated network. Once that thumb drive is plugged in, they now have access to, or potentially have access to, data that might not be publicly available or available from outside that location. There's been a number of breaches in the past. A U.S. embassy a while back was attacked in this way. A vendor down the street was selling compromised thumb drives. Someone from the embassy bought one, plugged it into their machine, and now that data is leaked out, or there was data that was leaked. These computers inside the embassy were not addressable. They were not on the internet. They were isolated, secure. Once this thumb drive got plugged in, all that data is up for grabs, essentially. Similarly, a few years back, there was an attack against some reactors internationally, nuclear reactors. These computers are isolated and not connected to the internet for very good reason. But a virus was loaded on a thumb drive. That thumb drive was left in a parking lot or other open area, and an employee grabbed it, picked it up, plugged it in, and this caused the reactors to generate false readings, and it could have been a lot worse than it was. But you can see where I'm going with this. Found hardware. You see something suspicious, see something on the ground, don't pick it up, don't plug it in. You don't know what's on it, or you don't know what reason someone might be. You don't know why they might have left that there. Another item, outdated firmware. So firmware, you really think more of iPhones and Android devices. It's a good kind of starting point, but a firmware is anything that runs on the more or less device level below the operating system. iPhones and Android devices have a firmware that kind of controls all of their runnings. A good example is the iPhone. Apple's really good about releasing updates. A few years back, there was an incident where the FBI wanted to have access to a person's phone. Apple refused, saying, nope, the device is encrypted, we don't have access to it. And it really escalated from there, back and forth until it went to court. And finally, the FBI just said, yep, you know what, never mind, we don't need your help anymore, we found another way to get the data. Unbeknownst to Apple at the time, there was a flaw in their firmware that was being exploited by a third party that allowed them to access that data even though the phone was encrypted. Apple is pretty good about patching those flaws, but they need to know about them first. So if you're running out of date firmware, those flaws cannot be patched. You need to update your phones regularly, update your devices regularly, make sure that you're running up-to-date firmware to prevent this type of breach or attack. Manufacturer backdoors. You've heard about this probably in the news pretty recently. Server manufacturer Supermicro, there were reports that foreign nationals were adding specific chips to the design that would allow them a backdoor into the systems that these chips were attached to. Apple, Amazon, Facebook, they were all mentioned in this report that they were compromised. They themselves, though, refuted the report, saying that no, we were not compromised, and this hasn't actually happened. But the jury's kind of still out as to whether it was legit or not legit. But these kind of things do exist. From a hardware standpoint, yes, these manufactured backdoors can be put in, but it's more likely they're put in on a software level. So if you run a Dell computer, for example, there were some vulnerabilities they had. They gave Dell a higher level of access for diagnostic purposes, but that could be exploited by third parties as well. Software vulnerabilities. Number one here is unsupported operating system. If you're running Windows XP, it hasn't been supported for quite a while. It was originally released in 2003. Get off of it. Microsoft no longer supports updates to that platform. When they announced that they were ending updates, they gave ample notice, and then when they finally cut it off, within a couple days, a new vulnerability was found that was a major threat, and Microsoft backpedaled a bit and said, you know what, we'll release one more update to fix this, but after this, we're not. They have released periodic updates to address major security concerns, but by and large, they're not doing that anymore. It's very out of date, and if you have a machine running Windows XP or Server 2003, you should definitely be looking at your options to decommission that or get rid of it. In addition to the outdated operating systems, you have outdated software. This also ties to operating systems as well, but there's generally routine updates, like the Windows updates. There's also software updates for applications such as Adobe, and then Word, Office Suite as well. If you have a piece of software on your computer, there's probably an update for it. Or there's updates released somewhat regularly for it. Just make sure those are up to date because they can contain vulnerabilities that can be exploited as well. Some of the more notorious offenders in this realm are Java and Flash. They've been exploited quite regularly, so if you are running those plugins on your machine, make sure that they're up to date. A lot of the newer softwares are pretty good about alerting people and updating automatically, but be aware that those are a potential threat. Finally, here we're going to talk about insecure remote access protocols. A lot of attacks take place when a computer is using insecure protocols for remote access. So if you have like a remote desktop install, or if you're utilizing remote desktop, or have LogMeIn or TeamViewer or another type of remote access protocol on your machine, make sure that you're using strong passwords. Make sure that those softwares are up to date. Since they allow for remote access to your machine, they're obviously a bigger threat than a lot of other softwares. Just be aware of that. Make sure that you're using strong passwords and you keep those up to date. By and large, though, the biggest vulnerability you'll run into is human vulnerabilities. 95% of all security incidents involve some sort of human error. So of everything we've talked about up to this point in terms of hardware and software vulnerabilities, they represent a very small fraction, 5% of all security incidents. Because of this, cybercrime is now the second most reported economic crime, and it affects 32% of organizations. So that's essentially 1 in 3. That's a pretty staggering number when you think about it. So how do people exploit this human vulnerability? Well, it can be done in a couple of different ways. One is phishing. Phishing is just an attempt to obtain sensitive information, such as usernames, passwords, or credit card details, by masquerading as a trustworthy entity in an electronic communication. So I'm going to show you some examples of this. Basically, it's an email that's sent that looks legitimate if looked at from a distance, where someone might be trying to gain access to those usernames and passwords. Sometimes they're convincing, sometimes they're not. So this is a sample Microsoft Office 365 phishing attempt. You'll notice a few things here. The email address is not coming from a Microsoft account. It's from an hkplus.cz. It doesn't really tie into what you're seeing in the rest of the email. You'll also notice that there's a generic dear mail at blah, 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 blah.com. Generally, these requests, since they're not super targeted, are somewhat vague in who they're trying to access. If you notice there's also a link. Some newer antivirus and web and mail filtering solutions rewrite these links, so this is not always something you'll notice. But if you notice here, you can hover over the link and it's going to a website that's definitely not Microsoft. Just another thing you want to look out for. One key thing that's common across a lot of these types of attacks or threats is bad spelling, bad grammar, bad punctuation. The goal of a lot of these is to kind of aim for the weakest link, someone who is going to look at this email and not put too much thought into it. If you're looking at the email and you notice, hey, this is spelled wrong, hey, this isn't capitalized, hey, this is not quite right, they're not after you. They want to go with someone who's going to take a look at this and say, oh, this is legit, and just click on the link right away. They don't want to waste their time on someone who's going to go halfway through the process and then give up because they realize it's not legit. So keep in mind, look for those types of things. If it's something that you feel might be legit, always get a second set of eyes, get it over to your IT provider, and have them take a look at it to verify its legitimacy or not. Here's another example. Same kind of red flags, you'll notice. This is coming from a service at international.paypal.com. That's where it says it's coming from. If you look after that, it's actually coming from service.epaypal.outlook.com. So not a legitimate PayPal address. The goal here is for you to have you click on that login link and sign in with your username and passwords, granting that third party access to your PayPal account. Again, there's a lot of red flags here, but keep in mind from the send your address and any links that you click on, make sure that they're going to the correct site. It's generally a good rule of thumb to not click on links in the email. If you think that this might be a legitimate email, go to paypal.com, log in directly with that site. You should be prompted with the same information. They don't set it up in a way where this is going to be the only notification you get. This is going to be something that's going to be readily visible on the website once you log in as well. DocuSign is another big one we see these days. It's becoming more and more prevalent in business. They're one of the major players for document signing. This looks completely legit. You click on the link and it's going to take you to a website asking you to sign in to verify your identity. We'll show you here. Page like this. This looks very similar to how DocuSign's login page used to look, but you'll notice a few things here. Each one of these options might not be something that would be an actual option on a DocuSign website, but they are the major players in the email marketplace. Clicking on a link would take you to a login page that would most likely mimic one of these services. The key thing you want to look at here is the address. You'll notice that this is not a DocuSign address. It's a wbcnotebook.com/wp-temp-blah, blah, 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 blah. This is not a DocuSign site. Someone is just hosting this on a website that they've made with the attempt to try to gain your credentials. Used to be a good rule of thumb. You would check to make sure that the website is secure. You'll notice here there's the little green lock up in the corner saying that the site is secure. So while this is not the legitimate website, the website is encrypting traffic between your browser and their servers. So it's not the best rule of thumb these days, but it is another thing you can look out for. In this case, they've done a good job of mimicking that functionality. Spear phishing. These are basically the same as the phishing attacks, but they're a lot more targeted. They're a lot more researched. They look a lot more real, and they target business owners or executives inside the organization. They're very well researched as well. They may use the same signature line. They may use the same font. They might use the same writing style. They might reference events or other types of going-ons inside your organization. Here's an example of spear phishing request. This was sent, and this one's kind of a good example showing that there's no links, there's nothing that really is a red flag. It's requesting data that may be completely within the realm of what your business operations would normally look like. They're looking for a copy of the W-2s and employee wage and tax statements from 2015. Just be aware of who's sending this. This might be coming from a legit address. This might be coming from a Gmail account. This might be coming from a Yahoo account. A lot of the times we see impersonation attempts where if the owner's name is John Smith, you may see johnsmith@yahoo.com instead of johnsmith@companydomain.com. It makes it seem a little more real. They may also mimic or copy a photo, signature block, just basically anything they can do to make this seem more legit. In this case, they're not directly after financial information, so credit card numbers, account information, but they are trying to gain information regarding employees. And this lets them steal those employees' identities potentially. W-2 employee wages and tax statements is going to give a massive amount of data for them to use against your company or your employees. Here's another example. This is more financially aimed. It's making just a request to do a wire transfer to some random payment. What's key to note here is it's using names. Hello, Stuart. I need an invoice. Peter needs us to pay today. So Peter may, in this case, may be the CEO. Stuart might be someone in the accounting department, and Scott, who is the sender of this email, may be another executive in the organization. This looks 100% legit at face value, but again, once this proceeds on, they may be giving a routing number or bank number to send this money overseas. If this is something you deal with, wire transfers or other type of financial transactions, you always want to make sure that you have a chain of command and a person you can verify with. Just reaching out to that individual on the phone and talking to them goes a long way to prevent this sort of thing. So I would say always recommend if it's a financial transaction and it seems at all fishy, or even if it seems completely normal, reach out to the individual who sent it and make sure that it's a legitimate request. And always reach out to them via another method. I wouldn't say respond to the email. I would say reach out by calling or talking to them in person or reaching them at another known good contact method. Having a policy in place for this sort of thing really goes a long way to prevent these types of attacks. So you can see here, basically from 2016 to 2017, the numbers have essentially doubled across the board. There's a larger number of malware infections, a larger number of compromised accounts, and also a lot of data loss as well. Overall, it's just becoming more and more of a threat as time. Social engineering. The goal here is to basically establish a relationship with the staff or client to basically create this familiarity and gain access to data they wouldn't normally have access to. Generally, you see someone maybe calling as a coworker, "Hey, John, this is Steve in accounting. I'm filling in for Debbie while she's out. I need access to this data. Can you please send this over to me?" Those are using legitimate names inside the company, but that person might not have access to that data or should have access to that data. It can also be a party calling from an outside number, pretending to be an employee. So be aware of that. Always have company procedures in place to kind of verify and vet these requests. You want to make sure that the people you're giving this data to are the people who actually should have access to it. Another good rule of thumb, as I mentioned with the spear phishing, is having a callback number, reaching out to the person direct. So if you get a call in requesting this data, say, "You know what, I'm more than happy to help you with this, but let me call you back on a known good number for you." Verify that from your own company records. Don't respond to an email from that party or a phone number that's listed in that email. You always want to make sure that you're reaching out to a known good contact method. So we've talked a lot about the social and the spear phishing and some of those human vulnerabilities, but more traditionally, what you would consider an exploit would be things like malware, viruses, and trojans. These are just softwares that get installed or run on a computer, and they are now Windows and Mac based. It used to be the Macs were a lot more secure, not so much anymore. They are both targets for hackers. Similar to the phishing emails, this is a malware attack email. You'll notice here that it has attachments that reply45.zip. Zip files should generally be treated with a little more caution to begin with. You also want to make sure that you know who this is from and everything seems legit there. Just don't go blindly opening attachments. You want to know that it's legitimate beforehand. Again, reach out to someone with known contact information. If this is something that you don't normally deal with or don't normally get, if someone sends you banking information and you're in, you normally are just like answering service calls, just delete the message. Don't even bother with it. It's most likely a phishing attempt or a malware attempt. Here's another good example of a malware email. This one's a little different. It doesn't have a direct attachment, but it's redirecting you to print a shipment label. These FedEx ones are pretty common. FedEx, UPS, both kind of are a good vector for people to use as for an attack. You'll notice here some of the same red flags as the phishing appear. No reply at outpost731.com. This is obviously not a UPS site. When you click on that shipment label, what it does will take you to a site that may or may not look legit. It also might just download a file to your machine directly. Be very, very wary of these. If you don't normally deal with UPS, I would say just delete these emails. If you deal with UPS regularly, you most likely have an online console website that you can visit to that will make reference to this as well. Log in there direct. Don't click on links in emails regarding this sort of thing. A bigger threat that's come up in recent years is ransomware. This is a file or malware that gets run on a computer and then proceeds to hold your files hostage. It encrypts them with military-grade encryption and then demands payment for the release of those files. Generally, once you're hit with a malware attack, your only real way to combat it is two things. You can either pay the ransom and get your data back or restore from backups. If you don't have good backups, your only option is to pay that ransom or just lose your data forever. Sometimes these ransomware applications are reverse engineered or shut down, and the keys to unencrypt these files are found. But that's not really, that's more of an exception and not the rule. If your data is encrypted, there's a good chance that you're not going to get it back without backups or paying the ransom. Even paying the ransom is a risky gamble. There's no guarantee that they're actually going to restore your data and give you back access to your files. You're dealing with criminals here, and while they want to create a good image and say, yes, we will restore your data and make you believe it, there's no guarantee that they're going to. Some basic ransomware statistics. A company is hit with ransomware every 40 seconds. You can see here it's a very big problem in the industry. 6 in 10 email malware payloads were ransomware in the first quarter of 2017. That number is pretty consistent and stays relevant to this day. But a large number of these malware attacks are going to be ransomware these days. 71% of targeted companies or companies targeted by ransomware have been infected. So if they are targeting you, there's a good chance that you will actually proceed and get infected as well. Now, this is such a big deal. These attacks are so effective that there's a whole new category of malware called ransomware as a service, where basically you don't have to know anything about coding. You can just go to a website, enter a list of email addresses, and whoever gets hacked and pays the ransom, you get a percentage back of that. It's definitely not legal, but it's so common and so prevalent that the criminal industry is really latched onto it. We talked a lot about email attacks, but going back to vulnerabilities, remote access protocols. 2/3 of ransomware infections in 2017 were delivered by remote desktop. This is really just having weak, easily guessable passwords or weak security on your machines and having remote desktop enabled. Make sure that your passwords are secure. Make sure they're not passwords that can be easily guessed. Otherwise, you kind of open yourself up to this sort of attack. And lastly, the average ransom demand has risen to over $1,000. These started off as a couple $100, then $400 or $500, then now they're up in the thousands. And this ransom, depending on the size of the organization, can change too. A few years back, a hospital in Southern California was hit, and they were paying ransom in the millions of dollars. Metro system in Northern California was hit a while back, and the ransom demands were significantly higher than that 1,000 for that. They didn't pay the ransom, and their systems were offline for quite a while, and people were riding the bus and train for free. So keep that in mind. Having good backups, having redundant copies of your data help prevent this sort of thing. Physical and proximity attacks. Generally, this is more of real world, not cybersecurity, but it still ties into cybersecurity. Just make sure that you have good security measures in place. Make sure that doors are locked. Make sure that you have access to restricted areas actually is restricted. If you have, I've seen this in some companies, their server sitting directly inside the door of their reception area. It's adequate cooling. Someone could just walk in if the receptionist isn't there, grab the server, and take off. Don't do that. Make sure that you have your data stored somewhere safe where it's not going to be easily accessible or stolen. Also, make sure that you have access control procedures in place, that not everybody has access to all data. A person in one of your normal, just everyday employees who maybe does like customer service does not need access to the CFO's records or tax data or financial data in general. So make sure that you have it structured in a way where that data is not easily accessible to them. Make sure that your Wi-Fi networks inside your office are locked down and you have a strong password so that someone can't jump on your Wi-Fi and gain access to your network. We usually set it up with an employee network, a corporate network, and then a guest network. The guest network is not linked or connected to the rest of the computer network in the office at all, and generally just provides straight access to the internet. We password protect those as well. Open Wi-Fi networks, this is what you would generally see at a place like Starbucks or other public locations. It's where someone has just an open Wi-Fi network that you can join. Your data transmitted over that is openly readable to anybody on that network. Individual traffic between yourself and a website might be encrypted, but there's still a lot of data that can be kind of gleaned from that. There's things called man-in-the-middle attacks where data is injected or pulled midstream from a communication. You have to be aware of those and the risks associated with that. So if you can at all avoid it, don't connect to open Wi-Fi networks. Use the hotspot on your phone or connect to a known good network for either your company, your home, or something that you can verify is legit. Lastly, other types of attacks that we just want to cover briefly. Be aware of weak or reused passwords. Try to come up with a unique password for each website that you're using. If you have trouble remembering passwords, come up with a formula or use some sort of password manager. Personally, I have a formula where I have a base password and then I have variables that change based on the type of password it is. So if it's like for a financial institution or a media account, social media account, I use different criteria to create a formula. As long as you can remember the formula, you'll do a pretty good job at remembering that password. If you still have trouble remembering passwords, definitely use password managers. There's websites like Bitwarden and LastPass that allow you to create a strong password and then store all your passwords there that are easily accessible. Oftentimes they even tie into your computer browser so that that data can easily be pulled when you need it. Again, if you are using a password manager, make sure that you have a strong base password and that you are changing that regularly. From a scam standpoint, you need to be watched out for support call scams. Microsoft is not going to call you. Microsoft is not going to attempt to fix a computer problem for you. That's your IT vendor that's going to be doing that. Same thing for IRS. If you get a call from the IRS, you are not wanted for tax evasion. They're going to send it via a more legitimate method, such as physical mail. And in rare occasions, you might even actually have a IRS employee showing up at your door. And with that, we're finally at the how-to. So we've talked about what's out there and what vulnerabilities they're exploiting. Now we're going to talk about what you can do to protect yourself against these things. Revisiting the original definition we looked at, cybersecurity is the technologies, processes, and practices designed to protect networks, computers, and data from unauthorized access. We're going to look at the technologies, processes, and practices. Really, in today's world, having one layer of protection is not enough. You need to have multiple layers of protection spread across the computer level, the network level, and programs to keep everything safe. We'll go through a couple of these that you can implement and discuss in a little greater detail. The technologies. Antivirus. Every computer, PC, or Mac should have antivirus these days. There are a number of free solutions if you don't want to pay for one personally, but the paid solutions are always going to be a little bit more comprehensive and provide a little bit better protection, mainly because money. It takes money to research, it takes money to implement new technologies, and baseline free solutions generally aren't going to give that functionality away. Another key thing is antivirus updates. Your antivirus is really only as good as its most recent update. Free antiviruses may not update as regularly, which leaves you potentially exposed until an update is released. Anti-malware, most antiviruses tie this functionality in as well. Some of the free ones do not. Malware is those programs that aren't necessarily viruses, but still pose a threat or may be unwanted by the end user. Firewalls. We in the MSP industry usually recommend what are called UTM firewalls, or Unified Threat Management firewalls. These kind of take a more comprehensive look at network security and implement a number of features that we'll discuss in a second. But a basic firewall just puts your computer or your network from being out there open on the internet. Most home ISPs provide a residential gateway or gateway that does provide a very basic firewall functionality, along with anything that does routing kind of has that same effect. But for businesses, we usually recommend something a little higher level. For home use, the one provided by your ISP is good for most situations. Talking about that UTM firewall, one of the key aspects that it ties in is intrusion prevention. This prevents unauthorized parties from kind of gaining access to your network by just restricting based on rules of who can get in and who can't. It also sometimes goes a bit farther by blocking repeated attempts to access computers or computers or devices by blacklisting the attacker's IP address or location. The UTM firewalls also tie in web filtering. Web filtering basically just prevents you from going to a website that might be compromised or a website that can be damaging to you or your computer. It can also go a step farther and block websites that you don't want people to go to. Maybe if you're a business, you might block Facebook or you block Instagram. That can be done via web filtering for non-security reasons, but it does tie into that software stack as well. Email security. This is something we recommend for all of our clients. It acts as kind of a more robust anti-spam, provides a lot of other functionality as well. Email security kind of sits in front of your email provider and pre-scans data before it gets to your inbox. Some of the solutions we use, in addition to just stopping straight spam, also look at the links in emails and rewrite them so that it validates them when you click on them. So you get a link in an email, you click on it, it's going to run it through its catalog of sites and say, hey, this is legit or this is not legit, and then prompt you or let you through accordingly. It also is going to potentially protect you against impersonation protection. So if someone sends, your name is John Smith and you're the CEO of XYZ Corp, it's going to stop someone potentially from sending an email from John Smith at wxycorp.com. Someone who might be trying to masquerade as you, and it bases it on similarity to your name. It can also do some filtering based on similar domain names. So if your website address is abci.com, maybe someone buys the domain abq.com, and that Q kind of looks like a C and an I pushed together, makes it easier for someone to quickly overlook. This kind of solution helps protect against that as well. Another thing it does is scans for potential malicious attachments in real time, either by delaying that message and scanning it, or releasing a quote-unquote sanitized version to you. It generally just kind of does a printout of that document, so the data might not be editable, but it should still contain roughly the same content and get the point across. If you ever need the actual attachment, there's a link to request that as well. Two-factor authentication. For most of those password-based attacks and phishing attempts where they're trying to gain access to your account, a lot of them can currently be thwarted by using two-factor authentication. This is a solution where once you log in with your username and password, it prompts you for a second code. We use an application called Duo, but there's a number of other solutions out there like Google Authenticator that provide the same functionality. Basically, you register your device with a website, and it then has a code that anytime you log in, that code rotates so that someone who has your username and password and tries to log in doesn't actually gain access to anything because they need that second factor code that changes regularly. Banking institutions use this quite regularly. If you've ever logged in, hey, we don't recognize this computer, send me a text message to confirm, and you have to enter a code from that. That's a form of two-factor authentication as well. It's generally recommended to implement these across the board. If it's a service that you care about, you can do this on Google, you can do this on Yahoo, you can do this on Amazon, Facebook has it, Instagram has it, pretty much every banking institution should have it. Definitely get this enabled. It just goes takes a little farther to help protect you. And finally, disk encryption. I mentioned having a computer just sitting out there in the open or a server sitting out there in the open. Disk encryption helps you prevent a data breach or data loss via theft. Generally, on most computers, when you pull the hard drive or try to pull the data and plug it into a different machine, you can get that data off. If the disk is encrypted, it's just going to be gibberish without an encrypted password or the encryption password. So just keep this in mind. If it's a need and there's a concern that sensitive data might be stolen, definitely look into your encryption options. The processes and practices. Monitoring and alerting. It's always good to have some policies in place to monitor and alert on things that are potential security concerns. If you're a client of ours, we are monitoring and alerting on your antivirus. So you might not know a threat was detected, but we're getting a notification on that. Same thing on firewall policies. If your firewall goes down or something's going on there, we're getting alerts on that. On the server side of things, we are monitoring files and folders for certain things as well to help prevent against malware attacks for our managed clients. Report auditing. If you have people that log in remotely, it's good to audit these reports regularly to see when people are accessing data. If they're coming in at 2 a.m. from Russia on a Sunday, if that's outside of your normal business practice, that's something you want to be aware of and do something to protect against. Routine vulnerability and security scans. We do this for the bulk of our clients as well. We run a scan that collects basically threat information on the network, things that might be exploitable, and then we work with our clients to patch these holes. This can be anything from ports and programs that are out of date on computers to users that haven't logged in X number of days, 90 days, let's say, or computers that are not up to date, or even just users that have weak passwords. We can run all those reports, and we generally work with staff to remediate all of those. Key as well is having established procedures. As I mentioned with the phishing attacks and the wire transfers, having procedures in place that you follow and having escalation points is really key to help protect against a lot of the vulnerabilities that take advantage of employees these days. We always recommend both phone and in-person verification. You want to make sure that you are talking to the person who the person you're talking to or communicating with is who they say they are. And if it's someone you know, then phone is good. In-person verification is better, especially if it's someone that you're not too familiar with. And that chain of command is key. Always be able to escalate to someone who can help you make that call if this is a legitimate attempt or not. If you're, again, someone who doesn't normally deal with billing and you get a billing request or a credit card authorization or something like that, get it over the right party, but also voice your concern as to whether it may or may not be legit or not. And then finally, the reason why we do these seminars and trainings is education. Knowing what's out there, knowing the risks, knowing the concerns really goes a long way to help prevent these sort of attacks. And finally, cybersecurity quiz. If you want to follow along and just quickly go through these, I wanted to give kind of a showcase of some real world scenarios that you might run into and have some true or false or multiple choice questions that might apply to your day-to-day operations. Question 1, true or false? Attachments should always be treated with caution, even if you know the sender. That is true. Again, always make sure you know that something that's being sent to you is legit. You can always reach out to that person to verify. Question 2. You receive an email saying that your PayPal account has been suspended pending confirmation of your personal information. The PayPal logo is in the body of the email, and the email is addressed to Dear Customer. The sender is PayPal or service@paypalcustomerserviceteam.com. What should you do? There's a couple right answers on this one, but the one we're really looking for here is delete the email. It's a phishing attempt. Remember, you can always log into your account and get those notifications, whether it be PayPal, Facebook, Amazon. They're going to have a way for you to pull those notifications directly without clicking on the link in that email. A thing to look out for on that notice was the email address is not a PayPal email address. It does not seem legit. So again, it's best to just delete it. Don't even open it. It's a phishing attempt. True or false? Using two-factor authentication is not an effective tool for securing your accounts. We talked about this close to the end, and the answer is false. Two-factor authentication is a very effective tool at securing your accounts currently. It means that without that second factor of authentication, a person cannot get access to your account. I'm not aware of any exploits happening right now, but it is possible that in the future someone may create a system that prompts you for that two-factor code, then collects that code, and while that code is only good for a small amount of time, you could be exploited in that amount of time. I haven't seen anything really in the news or hit that yet, but it is still important, even if you do have two-factor authentication enabled, that you are making sure you're giving your credentials to valid sources. Question 4, true or false? I have antivirus protection, so when it comes to network security, I'm all set. False. Again, it's important to have multiple levels of protection and policies and procedures and technologies in place. Antivirus used to be pretty decent, but now with the amount of threats there are out there, you want to have other security procedures in place, and again, just a general knowledge of what's out there. Education really goes a long way to help protect against this sort of thing. Question 5. Software and application updates are not important and can just be ignored. False. Obviously, keeping everything up to date is key to keeping your computer both running smoothly and securely. Out-of-date software, out-of-date applications can have bugs, can have flaws that can be exploited by third parties. So keeping those softwares and applications up to date really goes a long way to help protect you as well. Question 5. True or false? Cybersecurity is IT's responsibility. The everyday end users in the office don't need to worry about this topic. That is false. Everybody needs to be concerned about cybersecurity, and everybody should be aware of the threats that are out there. It can't just fall on your IT department. This is really a solution that needs to be on everybody. Knowledge is really the biggest thing here. Knowing what's out there, knowing what's legit, knowing what's not legit, or at least being able to verify and scrutinize things a little further goes a long way to help protect you as well. This concludes our presentation. Thank you for watching. If you have any questions, please feel free to email our support team at support@mtinc.net or call our office at 844-463-8463. Thanks again for watching, guys.